Hey, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural podcast of
The BOOM COLEctive.
I'm Matt Boomala.
And I'm Mark Cole.
And we have a great guest today on our very first podcast. Who is it, Mark?
Well, I got a little secret. I got the OG right there, baby. The new ones are green this year in red. Stay tuned.
All right. Well, Joe, thank you for being our first guest on the inaugural The BOOM COLEctive podcast. We know you've been on Sean Ryan, you've been on Donald Trump Jr., Tulsi Gabbard. I mean, so many great podcasts, and you finally arrived at the BOOM COLEctive.
I finally made it. Yeah,
You made the cut.
Yeah. No, thanks for taking the time to sit down.
Yeah, and Joe, it means a lot to us. You were very influential in Matt and my kind of not so much red pilling, but really saying, hey, it's time to stand up. We got to get involved. I was very apolitical. I'm a union fireman.
Yeah.
And so kind of my background was with collective bargaining and kind of going one way. But through COVID and everything that was going on, it really had me wake up, see the big picture. And as this was happening, you were getting in the race. You were getting in the fight. And so just a big thank you to you. I feel like Matt and I have a lot just following you. We've kind of grown up in this with you.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I appreciate you guys being on the ride with me. You guys have been early supporters and strong supporters, making a big difference in the community.
Well, for those of the audience members that don't know you as well as we do, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, where you grew up, why you're running for Congress, all that good stuff.
Whew, that's tough. Yeah.
Just the easy ones first.
Yeah, it's the easy ones first. So, I mean, really, our country's being destroyed right now. Right. And I think that's on display. It's been on display, basically, I really think, since 2020. Prior to that, I was in the military. I did 20 years in the Army, did about a year in the CIA. Grew up before that, rewinding, grew up in Portland of the 80s and 90s before it became, true full-blown Portlandia. Yeah. But was up in this area quite a good deal when I was in Boy Scouts. So a lot of camping on the Lewis River, pretty close to where I live now. So this has always been a area I wanted to return to. I just had an unexpected return after serving and spending a lot of time overseas. My late wife, Shannon, who was also in the military, was killed fighting ISIS in Syria in 2019. So briefly moved back home, realized that Portland was not the Portland I left in 98. And I wasn't going to raise my kids there. And this is basically when the country lost its mind. It's when COVID started. It's when the riots started in Portland. And so I was lucky to find a spot out in our house out in Yacolt. So moved out here, was actually excited to vote for our former Congresswoman, Jamie Herrera Butler, because she was a Republican and in the Pacific Northwest. And then the election went the way that it did. I had actually started speaking out on behalf of Trump's foreign policy after my late wife was killed and after I left the CIA, because I really thought that Trump was getting it right, even though he wasn't getting any credit for it. Right. He actually was saying all the things that those of us on the ground had been feeling for almost 2 decades at that point. So I was a pretty strong Trump supporter, and my late wife was killed a month after Trump tried to get our troops out the first time. So was speaking out, had a plan to go back and work in a second Trump admin, got the invite to go do that, and then the election went the way that it did, and then my congresswoman voted for Trump's impeachment. And so I was mad about that. A lot of people were mad about that, but I didn't see anybody standing up and saying like, hey, I'm going to primary her, because, primarying is the mechanism we have when our congressmen or congresswomen from our own party go to Washington, D.C. and don't do what we hired them to do. You primary them. And so I felt really strongly that she at least needed a primary challenge. Yeah. And nobody else was doing it, and so I was like, "What the heck? I'll give it a whirl," because that's kind of the way I was raised in the military. Like in absence of orders, you attack, and if you're looking around trying to figure out who's in charge, congratulations, like, you're in charge. It's on you.
And I remember reaching out to you back when I was on Facebook. I haven't been on it for almost 2 years now. But I think you only had like 40 or 50 followers. Like
I created a Facebook.
You just created a Facebook.
Yeah.
I instant messaged you and said, "Hey, I have been involved in politics since I was a kid, as far as being aware, but I hadn't really been doing anything actively, boots on the ground helping." And so I reached out to you, and then there was a forum like the next week, and I shook your hand. I'm like, "Hey, I'm the guy that reached out to you and said I want to help out." And
and then you were like, "Hey, Mark, I'm going to bring sound to this." this guy that's going to be running against Jamie.
Yeah. So all I wanted to do was bring
Sure.
a portable sound system. That's what it all meant to be. And then, everything kind of snowballed to where it is. But yeah.
Which was incredibly helpful because not having a PA system for doing town halls and stuff, you lose your voice pretty quick.
Yep.
And the campaign didn't have any money. So we were literally all on full volunteer power for the first 6 months. So it was a lifesaver.
You didn't tell me that one event you had at the Clark County Fairgrounds, it was the day of something kind of fell through. Like, hey, man, can we use your sound system? We're going to be doing an event at the Clark County Fairgrounds parking lot. And I went, sure. And then so-and-so is going to call you. And so I talked to so-and-so, and it was like layers of security. I'm like, what? I usually just meet at a park somewhere. Like, it's just meet you at the park. And then I realized, this is a rally with Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I'm standing behind the trailer, and there's Matt Gaetz and his then fiance, his wife. Yeah. And I'm like, Matt Gaetz, nice to meet you. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is not like the proper sound equipment for it, but it worked. It worked.
No,
it worked with all those people out there. So yeah. Anyway, so I remember meeting you at that time, and then you went on the campaign trail. Was very involved in that whole process. We had a food fight as a Republican Party.
We did.
We'll get to it later on, but it's really good to see the unity that's happened. Post all that, but also it's important for the voters, I think, to hear what happened. How many voters sat out? What happened after the primaries? Where was your bank account at to start everything out? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it was a brutal primary. We were going after an incumbent Republican, and there was 2 other really strong candidates. So there was 4 strong candidates in that race. We can get into all those dynamics, and it was a hard race. The Republican establishment spent about $14 million against me in the primary.
Say that again. The Republican
establishment.
For people who don't know, and you think, I just vote for the R's, there's a whole behind the scenes here. So we had mainstream Republicans who were more threatened to have Joe in office than to even have a Democrat in office, the way I see it.
Yeah, at the time.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
They were trying to preserve their incumbent. So yeah, a lot of money spent against us in the primary. We had raised about $3 million, but we burned through all that, just kind of staying alive. And then when I limped across the finish line, we were in for another big fight because the Democrats are smart. I mean, they have horrible ideas, but they're very well organized. And so they saw that there was a Republican bloodletting taking place. They smartly had no primary on their side whatsoever, consolidated around one candidate, Marie Perez, and loaded her up with $6 million. So at this time in 2022, we were in debt. We had a divided Republican Party. I think maybe by mid-October we had clawed our way back out of debt, but we most certainly didn't have enough money to get up on the air in a very meaningful way. So we were really just running out of cash and being outspent 6-1, despite only being despite being outspent by 6-1. We only lost by less than a percentage point. But to your point, we had 60,000 Republicans sit it out. They didn't even cast a vote in 2022. And that's not because they just didn't like any of the candidates. That's because we have a problem in nationwide, but in this district is actually fairly pronounced. In presidential cycles, Republicans tend to win by about 4% in this district. In non-presidential cycles, it becomes a horse race. Democrats can win because Democrats bring their people out consistently. We have about 60,000 low propensity voters who only vote top ticket.
Well, as a party, we've identified here locally in Clark County 15,000 low propensity voters that should vote, more to the right, but just are infrequent in their voting. Yeah. And seeing that the end result in the general last year was 2,600 votes. I mean, less than 1%.
Less than 1%. Yeah.
Less than 1%. It was so close. But I think one of the big problems we have is undervoting. People will get a ballot and they will go, okay, Trump, I don't know who these guys are. That's all I'm voting. Or, they'll see your name and vote and then no one else below that. And what happened, I think a big part of what happened and what was brought up a lot was Tiffany Smiley, for example, was running for U.S. Senate. She got 11,000 more votes than you did in the district. Well, that's indicative of people who were maybe rooting for a different Republican candidate that were upset with the results of the primary.
Correct, yeah.
They voted for Trump. They skipped the CD. They voted for U.S. Senate. They skipped CD3, and they maybe voted for a couple other things.
And if we discuss issues with those people, we probably agree on 99.9%.
Yeah. Well, and some of the behind the scenes with Clark County being a huge part of that at the time. Our folks that were running the party and whatnot were very split. There was infighting at the time, people disagreeing on this, that, and the other thing. So
And there was no involvement in the primaries. They kept their hands out of it.
Yeah,
in the race, you probably saw that the
Right.
party didn't really get involved
Right.
in helping or even talking to the other candidates about unity, about anything. And so, you know, that changed obviously the last couple of years where we got behind candidates early, including you.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think I feel like we learned our lesson, especially here in the 3rd district.
I think so,
Clark
too.
County being the biggest county in the district, but even our smaller counties, there was some division in 2022. But I think the postmortem that we did after, unfortunately losing by less than a percentage point, people really realized, hey, if we want to win this, it's very winnable, but we got to get our act together.
Yeah.
And so this last primary cycle that we had, I had an opponent, but I mean, people consolidated early around me, but even a lot of the folks I think that supported my primary opponent immediately endorsed me on election night, and I haven't seen any of the issues that we had last time. So I'm cautiously optimistic. You know, I feel like we really learned our lesson, and Republicans have put in the hard work to stay unified.
Well,
this
and I think
time.
what was great about also the primaries this time is there wasn't the same food fight at all.
There wasn't,
You know,
no.
like everything was a class act on both ends.
It was,
your end and
100%,
her end.
yeah,
And so,
yeah.
you know, that was something we needed to see, you know,
Yeah.
and I think that was a big breath of fresh air and everyone wiped the sweat off their brows as a voter.
it was
and
nice, it was
like,
nice.
okay, we didn't
Yeah.
do
Are
that
we gonna
again.
do this
We
again?
didn't do that again.
Yeah.
So tell me about like your family a little bit. So you got remarried.
I did. Yeah.
And your boys are getting big. Tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, very blessed. About a year after I lost Shannon, I met my wife Heather. We just got married 2 Augusts ago, August of 2023. So yeah, she adopted the boys. I mean, the boys really,
Awesome.
they were 1 and 3 when Shannon was killed, so they immediately fell in love with Heather, and she's just been such a blessing. I mean, she homeschools them now. We've got a great community out in Yakult, our community church where our kids do the homeschool co-op and all that. So I mean, it's the boys are 7 and 9 now, and just really thriving out there.
Well, I see the videos you post of them, and they're out there with sticks, sword fighting.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
these- like
badasses.
you are raising some true original he hims.
We are, we are definitely. It's man camp for sure. Like,
Yeah,
they're-
I'm
they're
certain
built
when they
forward, so
turn
sword fighting.
18 and they
Yeah.
get to decide what gender they are,
Right.
they're going to
Probably-
identify with their penises. That's all.
Probably won't be too many questions. Yeah. And it's funny because like we're kind of we're not off the grid, but we're kind of off the beaten path out there. And like my kids don't have screens because people always ask me like, you're being attacked relentlessly on the air. Like, how are you guys holding up? And I'm like, oh, I don't see any of it. I mean, we look at the attack ads like academically from the campaign perspective.
Right.
I mean, but we're not online. My kids aren't online. They don't have screens. We don't watch TV. My community is very, very supportive.
There is a reality. So talk about that. Your opponent, Marie Perez, who's an extreme leftist who tries to masquerade as this moderate.
Yeah.
I mean, the Democrat Party knows that she's in a very vulnerable seat.
That's right.
And so they're trying to protect her. How much money have they thrown at her to throw all these crazy ads?
Oh,
at you?
man, I'd have to take a look in this campaign. And it's interesting. Perez's team started really, really early. Now, she's an incumbent, and she didn't have a primary opponent. So in theory, she should have just been on coast mode until the primaries were sorted out, but she wasn't. She knows that she's going to be underwater if people learn what her actual voting record is.
Yeah.
Now, I've learned that most incumbents, they don't want you to look at their voting record. They want to be able to message to you in 30-second ads they can flood the airwaves with how great they are and how they're fighting for you in Washington, D.C. And it's actually very hard to look up your congressman, your senator's actual voting. Like, what have you actually voted on? That's challenging to do. That's why we had to establish a whole website that has all of Marie's votes in one place with links to the house.gov.
And that's, what's that,
website,
Marie Watch?
MarieWatch.com. You can see it there. So Marie knows if people figure out that she voted for all the inflation, the open borders, the men in your daughter's dressing room, and the list goes on, that she's going to be in a lot of trouble. So she has been flooding the airwaves basically since early summertime. So I think so far she's spent about $6 million. We anticipate here in the next, I think,
another
14
probably,
days. We think several million more.
Yes.
Because look, in the primary, this just speaks to how winnable this is. In the primary, she didn't have an opponent. Keep that in mind. She couldn't crack 50%. So she should have gotten 50% easy with the divided Republican. Not divided, but I had an opponent.
You had an
the votes were
opponent.
split. And she still didn't crack 50%. So the Dems have been flooding the market, the market with money. Yeah.
Can you and Brian, you pulled that up real quick, the Marie Watch. Let's take a look at that real quick and kind of so people can see.
Yeah.
So Joe, you've got all things listed on here, and it explains what the things were, what the bills were, what she voted
You'll
on.
hear in our debates, Marie will say, "Ignore Joe's off-brand website," is what she calls it. And Marie will say, way, just go to my roll call vote record. There's no such thing. It doesn't exist. There is a roll call vote, but in order to look up how your representative has voted, you have to know the exact bill number.
Right.
And how many people know that.
Yeah.
So here on Marie Watch, we have subject by subject. If you want to look at how she's been voting on immigration, on the cost of living, inflation, protecting men and women, all that type of stuff, foreign policy,
Right.
you can go and you can click on it, and there's an explanation of the bill, but then there's actually the link to her rollcall.gov vote. So it's not just coming from me. You can fact check me on there and go to the official website.
Well, and it's really interesting too, because when she ran the first time, she was able to kind of, I remember a commercial where she's like prancing through the woods in a brand new lumberjack uniform with a brand new helmet, with a saw, you know.
Falling a tree with a leaf blower.
Yeah, and it was like, it was, but it was one of those things where it was like, we had no record. So all we had was her promises, right?
Yeah.
Now we have the record. Yeah. We can see exactly how she's voted. And from what I've seen, she's voted 100% with the Bidens.
Yeah. Yeah, so she'll throw out there that I'm one of the top 3 most bipartisan, whatever.
Right.
On all the procedural votes, and procedure votes actually probably matter more than policy votes, because procedure votes control if policy votes hit the floor. Right. She has voted in lockstep with the Democrat Party. Now, the Democrats are smart. They know that the Republicans have a very thin majority right now. So if they try to kill all the bills they don't want to get put on the floor in the procedure. And Perez votes 100% of the time with them. And then when the bill is actually put out on the floor, they will let Perez and the other 4 Democrats that are in Trump districts vote with the Republicans, because they know that they already lost it. And they also know Schumer's going to kill it in the Senate.
Yeah. Right.
But that still hasn't stopped her from voting in lockstep, I think, with the Democrats on the most consequential bills, leaving the border wide open, all of the inflation, escalation towards World War III, attacks on American civil liberties.
Yes.
And then, I mean, most egregiously, I think, voting to put men into your daughter's dressing room. I mean, she has voted in lockstep with the Democrats on all of those.
Right. So she's just throwing a bone when they know they're going to win anyway.
Yeah,
when her vote doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's a perform. When they know their vote doesn't matter, that
it's a disingenuous thing to do to have some type of sleight of hand to the voters to make them think that, no, look, I vote bipartisan.
So she can fool
but in the
us
procedure,
at home.
So everybody that's listening and understand that she knows it's a lost cause, but it's a signal to try to appear
to keep her voters.
that she's being moderate when she actually would have voted. If it would have succeeded in their favor, she would have voted accordingly in the procedure.
And the procedure vote shows you exactly how she'd vote if the Democrats are able to flip the House. If Hakeem Jeffries has the gavel, she will vote as she's told with him. Because look, there are Republicans who vote against the rule. Actually, it happens quite frequently in the Republican Party. Yeah. You never see that with the Democrats. Now, it's technically, a lot of old school Republicans will tell you it's very bad form to vote against the rule. But there's a lot of Republicans who stand on principle and will say, like, if it's a bad bill, it's a bad bill. I'm going to try and kill it in the crib. I don't want to vote for it and then I don't want to vote for it, then have to vote against it.
Right.
You do not see that from the Democrat side. So her procedure votes are indicative of exactly how she'd vote if the Democrats take the gavel.
And that's probably another example of how the Democrats are organized and conniving, at that level and what they're trying to do. I mean, their ideas are bad, like you said, but they know how to go lockstep into a plan and into a mission together a little bit better than we have lately. And so we got to fix that.
Yeah.
You were talking about the border. I mean, the border is obviously a huge issue. And we'll have some video clips later on where you guys are actually debating that and talking about that. But you've been to the border several times.
Yeah.
What was that like? What were you witnessing? Were you witnessing families flooding hand in hand, trying to look for a better life? What was it like when you went to the border?
So I've been out of the border twice, and I went once in 2021 when the invasion first started, when Biden came into office. I went down to the Yuma sector with Representative Paul Gosar. That's his district. He was nice enough to take me down there. And that was right when the invasion started. And it was, I mean, thousands of people coming across the border. However, like, because the invasion had just started, you did see a lot of, like, Hispanics. There's a lot of people you're like, okay, this isn't good that our border's being overrun. However, these people all look like they belong here, like they're our neighbors, like they're coming here. A lot of them were seeking economic opportunity because the Biden administration really had offered them a very good deal. And so it shocked me I'd say the scope and the size of how many people were coming across the border, and that we frankly just didn't have a border. That was shocking, but I wasn't really shocked by the people that I saw. I mean, mostly I think it was guys looking for jobs. There was some families, but not a lot.
Yeah.
When I went back again in February of this year, of 2024, and I specifically went down to the San Diego area. And I went there after doing ride-alongs with the Clark County Sheriffs, with the Centralia PD, with the Lewis County Sheriff's Department, and then with talking with the DEA task force that's responsible for the Portland to Seattle I-5 corridor because of the fentanyl crisis. Because there's people dying from fentanyl overdoses like at an exorbitant rate in our district. And that's not according to me. The Colombians covered this. And they all said the same thing. They were like, the fentanyl is coming into our district. It's coming right up the I-5 corridor. It's entering America down there at the San Diego point of entry. And that's actually been disclosed now by DHS that is like the #1 area. And for very good reason, too, because they know that they get it on I-5 and it's a straight shot. No one's stopping it because between California, Oregon, and Washington, there is very lax law enforcement just because of Democrat leadership. So I went down there to get boots on the ground and see for myself. And the sheer volume of people I saw crossing, again, shocked me. However, I think I can probably count on one hand the number of like Hispanics I saw across the border.
Really?
The vast majority, Chinese nationals and men from the all military age men.
Wild.
And none of these guys looked like they were looking for work on a construction site. I mean, these guys were clean cut. They were, I'd say, well dressed. They dressed like they just stepped out of REI. Very similar to how me and my friends did in Special Forces when we infiltrated countries in civilian clothes.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them are here looking for work.
I mean, what I hear from that, I mean, help me out here. I am hearing that this is a well-funded group of people
100%.
that are coming over.
100%. Man, I spent a lot of time in war zones, and refugees have a very distinct look to them. They are fleeing. They are downtrodden. They are carrying everything they can take on their backs.
Right.
They have their families with them.
None of it matches.
Whereas none of it matches. I mean, these are destitute people, right?
Yeah.
But when young men go to invade countries, they don't take all their worldly possessions and they don't bring their families. And it's usually, relatively physically fit and capable men that go and do that. And that's exactly what I saw. And again, the most glaring thing to me was I was like, okay, where are all the dudes from South America and Mexico? Like, none of you guys are my I know none of you guys are my neighbors. Like, Chinese nationals. Yeah. And then we also had the guys from the Middle East. And the guys from the Middle East all knew not to say they're from the Middle East. Right. A lot of them some of them would say they're from Turkey. Some of them would say, that they were from Europe. But I speak a little bit of Arabic. And I heard a lot of that. And I could tell, who these guys were. And so that stuck out to me, but also, and we can get into this when we talk about the Democrats' proposals to fix the border, which don't actually fix the border. Right. But these guys all knew to come right across the border, and they knew to basically find the first Border Patrol officer they could and declare asylum. Right. Because that's become the golden ticket into America. And they were overwhelming the Border Patrol. And the Border Patrol officers would tell you this when you're out there. Yeah. Hey, we're overwhelmed because basically we're supposed to serve as these guys' taxi service. They all know where to come. They claim asylum. And our job is to get them actually off of the border. Yeah. And then at night, if you were out there with some night vision or some thermals or whatever, you would see all the guys that didn't want to get caught by the Border Patrol come across because the Border Patrol was absolutely overwhelmed. And that's where the fentanyl's coming from.
The night runs.
The night guys. Yeah. Or you'd sometimes you would see it during the day too. If they sent over a big group of people, like 100 plus, they knew that like the 4 Border Patrol dudes that were out there were overwhelmed. And at the end of the day, like the Border Patrol guys know they really can't stop these guys. Like they can confiscate the fentanyl, but it's an open path right now to come into our country.
Right. How many per day are coming through right now? They said the numbers that have been coming through.
Yeah, the numbers vary, and I don't trust any of the numbers. Sure. But I think it's around 5,000 per day. And I think that number's off because that relies on the Border Patrol to count them, and that means these are the ones that are claiming asylum, right?
And those are the ones that we counted, like that we're aware of.
Exactly.
Yeah. And with that, I mean, you have, and Trump's talking about doing a mass deportation. So talk about in Congress what your role could be in a situation like this where now you've been elected, you're in D.C. What do you do day one with the border?
So day one at the border, we passed H.R. 2, and that's the bill that Marie voted against. One of the first votes she took in Congress was to vote against H.R. 2. And H.R. 2, I really encourage people to look it up. It's a very simple bill, but it is the most comprehensive border and immigration bill that you've ever had. So number one, it provides funding to actually construct the wall, to actually build the wall. And people will get really down in the weeds about asylum policies and who's coming into our country. It's essential to build the wall to stop the fentanyl. Also the people, but really the fentanyl. Because until you actually have a physical barrier there, they're going to find gaps, and they're going to be able to get the fentanyl into the country. Yeah. So I think that first and foremost to stop people from ODing, in our country, 100,000 Americans a year, just absolute insanity.
From being poisoned, right?
Yeah, being poisoned, being literally killed by the cartels and the Chinese Communist Party, who sends over the precursors. Another big thing, too, that we have to get back under control is the asylum policy. One of the first things that Biden did, and that's the reason why all these guys know, hey, come right to the Border Patrol, claim asylum. That's your golden ticket into America. And then they're given a legal status. So the guys that have come in, and I call them illegals, but technically they're not, because a lot of them have been given a status of either paroled in place, which means they'll wait for their asylum date, and most of them never come back for their asylum date.
Right.
Or they're given the temporary protective status if they're from a country that we deem to be an authoritarian country or a country in crisis. You're seeing that right now with the Haitians in Ohio. But the asylum loophole needs to be closed.
Absolutely.
That means, like, if you want to claim asylum, America's still a very generous country. And I have sympathy for people who want to claim asylum. I sponsored asylum visas for some of our allies in the Middle East and Iraq.
Awesome.
But there's a process for it. And here, this is just common sense. You can't come right to America and claim asylum. We need to vet you before you claim, before you get asylum.
And what other countries allow an open border policy like the United States?
Few.
Yeah.
Few, none. No,
Pretty much
no
none.
country that wants to be a real country.
Correct. Well, and I looked for it and couldn't find it. I tried to find out what percentage of folks that got over showed up 2 years later when their scheduled hearing was. They don't like to give out that
tiny.
number. It's fractional, I'm sure.
It's very,
so they've already kind of ingrained themselves into, society or somewhere.
So the closing the asylum loophole, I think Trump could do that through executive order, but I think we need to codify that into law. And something else that we need to codify into law, too, is that if you come into our country illegally, you will never become an American citizen.
Yeah.
Like, period, end of story. Because right now, if you come into our country and you blow off your court date and for asylum, it's reasonable for you to believe that someday you will be given a pathway to citizenship, because we've been giving blanket amnesties longer than all of us have been alive, basically since the 60s. And Republican and Democrat presidents alike have been giving these blanket amnesties. That's got to stop, because that serves as a draw. You know, like, why wouldn't you come here illegally? And then why would you even show up to your court date? Someday you're going to be given a pathway to citizenship. So I think we need to codify it in the law and say, hey, we're passing this law. Trump signs it. And here's the thing, what we do. I think we say this law goes into effect in 60 days. If you're out of here between now and 60 days,
you can go through the process.
You can go through the process. As a matter of fact, we'll even pay for your plane ticket to get the heck out of here, because that's actually going to save the taxpayer money in the long run. So I think that right there, and then we have to cut off all the economic incentives. Like right now, we're basically giving Social Security like benefits to a lot of these illegals that come over. Perez voted for all of that. We're giving them housing vouchers. We're giving them food vouchers. Like we're giving them all these different things that they didn't pay into and that American citizens don't have access to. If you cut that off, then you start going after the employers that are hiring these guys, mandatory e-verify. That's going to take away the incentives for a lot of them to be here. And I think you're going to see a lot of self-deportations, and that's going to free up the resources to go after the bad actors.
Well, and meanwhile, I've got a place in Florida. It was pretty awesome. I literally bought it 1 month prior to Hurricane Helene coming through.
Oh, did you?
And demolishing it. 5 feet of water inside this place.
That house had survived since the 60s,
It had been there since the 60s. We had, anyways, we don't have to go there. But my point is, so I go over there. I fly out there a day and a half after the hurricane passes through. I'm going through my neighborhood. Everything's destroyed. And over the week, we're taking everything out to the studs, all of us, and we're helping. It was actually really beautiful, because I end up, the only person I knew out there, because I'm so new, is my realtor. I said, hey, what are you guys doing? Hey, we've got a group helping these elderly people. So I just embedded with them, and we started helping other people, and then they came over and helped me with my stuff. But I guess my point is, FEMA, they get $750.
Yeah.
$750 was what's available and allotted to these families and whatnot. And the big conversation, discussion over there across the board is, I guess what we should do is head over into Mexico, come over illegally, and then we'll get $2,500 Visa cards. Yeah. We'll get our housing taken care of. And people are very frustrated with these policies.
Yeah. Or become a defense contractor that says you'll ship something to Ukraine.
There you go.
I mean,
and that's exactly what I was about to say.
Millions of dollars, so it's the priorities of our government, I mean, there's the criminal aspect there, I think, of like FEMA money getting reallocated for the illegal immigrants.
Right.
And people keep asking me, like, is this true? I'm like, yeah, it's 100% true. You can look up the documents yourselves. I said, what I think is a better question is, can you find a part of the federal government right now that hasn't had its resources pilfered to handle illegals coming into our country? Because that's the more challenging part. I mean, the VA has had to reallocate resources down to the border to deal with this.
Right.
I mean, the list goes on. Like it's evident right now that our government's priority is not taking care of our people.
I think some people are waking up too that were originally kind of on board with helping the Ukraine out. I've talked to several people that went, at first I thought we were going to help them out and this would kind of dissipate, and they realize this is a never-ending war. It looks like that we're funding, and at the tune of how many are we, over $100 billion now or so?
We're closer to
closer to $200 billion for the Ukraine. And we see what happens in North Carolina. We see what happens in Florida. We see what's happening with our veterans and how much resources we could try to pull together to help our own, and we're not, while we funnel money out there.
Well, and not to mention, I mean, what's the most recent number of Ukrainian boys who have been murdered in this war? I mean,
it's hard to get the numbers accurate.
I mean, I've heard minimum 400,000.
Yeah.
I mean, it's massive numbers.
I mean, it's so bad. I mean, they're drafting guys that are in their mid 40s right now. So that's an indicator. I don't know exactly what the number is.
Everybody younger has already gone and died.
They're out of the guys that typically fight wars, which is insane.
It's a shame.
Yeah,
and so we've been funding that.
We've been funding that. And at the end of the day, too, like I was against our involvement in Ukraine for a wide variety of reasons. Like at the onset of the war, I got called all kinds of names during that heated debate. But at this point, it's like, hey, this has been going on now. February coming up here will be the 3-year anniversary. So we're over 2.5 years. And it's like, okay, by any measurable metric, our current policy has failed. It's been disastrous for America. We're $37 trillion in debt. It's completely unsustainable for us to kick down $100 billion every single year.
Right.
But let's say even if we were fiscally solvent and we just had extra money laying around, all our people were taken care of, like the strategy hasn't worked. Russia controls more ground inside of Ukraine than they did at the beginning of the war. Ukraine is running out of men. You could send an unlimited amount of money and weapons over there. You need men to fight wars, period, end of story. They're out of that. And what's more dangerous is like we have even crossed the stated red line of the Biden administration at the beginning of the war. At the beginning of the war, Biden said we won't give the Ukrainians long-range missiles that can be shot into Russia because that would be World War III. We've crossed that red line, and now we're shooting American missiles into Russia.
Well, we're about to cross another one. We're going to put boots on the ground, I hear.
I mean, there's a lot of folks in NATO, especially the Canadians and the French, that have been advocating for this very, very heavily. For us to put NATO advisors, boots on the ground. I mean, if you just read the history of Vietnam, some of the first guys we had in Vietnam were advisors. I was an advisor in Yemen. I can tell you, like, it is the prequel to actual boots on the ground. And then
seen this movie, you know how it ends.
Yeah, and what happens when one of them gets killed? I mean, then are we actually in a shooting war with the Russians? You've got Russian and Chinese joint air patrols that are doing incursions into Alaskan airspace, and that's just them poking us back in the chest, saying, you have an alliance? We have an alliance, and we're on your border. You're on our border.
Right.
Incredibly dangerous. I mean, under Kennedy, under Reagan, Republican and Democrat alike, anytime we got really close to going to a hot war with the USSR during the Cold War, cooler heads prevailed. Like on the Russian side and on the American side, we backed off and we're like, hey, we both got nukes, man. We don't want to do this.
Right.
And we're not doing that right now. Like we're closer. We're closer to a potential like nuclear exchange than we've been since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and no one's talking about it.
So what's the solution with you going into Congress with what fingers crossed Trump wins this election, which he should. How do we end this conflict going on in the Ukraine?
Yeah, I believe that Trump actually could get this solved very, very quickly. What the mainstream media really covers is that at the very beginning of the war, within the first 2 months, Zelensky and Putin were at the negotiating table. They were using the Israelis and the Turks to mediate, and the West came in, America and the Brits came in and physically moved Zelensky away from the negotiating table. And since then, we've been pursuing this policy. So we know the Russians and the Ukrainians will get to the negotiating table. We can get Zelensky back to the negotiating table by saying, hey, if you ever want any help rebuilding your country, you will be at the negotiating table. I think Trump is uniquely postured where he can say to Putin, like, hey, we're not going to put Ukraine into NATO. We won't put NATO right up onto your border. Let's get to the negotiating table. And I think Trump will be able to communicate this very, very well, that right now, both sides, the Russians and the Ukrainians, can walk away from the negotiating table after a ceasefire. They can agree to work out the details of territory later on, but they can both turn to their people and say, we did it. Yeah. The Ukrainians can look at their people and say, we beat back the Russian invaders. And they did. Yeah. They held their ground, and they should be proud of that. Putin can turn back to his people and all his military leaders. They can be like, look, we got NATO off of our border. And both sides can be kind of happy but not so happy, which is what a negotiation is, and we take down the tensions. There was a proposal during that negotiation that I thought was pretty pragmatic that would basically say that NATO and Russia would be the security guarantors of Ukraine, which basically makes Ukraine a neutral zone, which I think is best for everybody, and it stops the killing. From the congressional perspective, we need to support President Trump, like not give any more blanket aid. I think that's absolutely essential. And then look, I do think whether it's Trump in the White House or anybody else, Congress has got it, and we can talk about this with Israel too. Congress has to take back their constitutionally directed power over war. Like, we shouldn't be letting the executive branch, one guy, regardless of who's in charge, take us off to war. I mean, the founders warned against that. They wrote it in the Constitution, and basically post World War II, Congress, Republican, Democrat alike, they've basically just said, "Hey, we just write the checks and fund things. It's all you. Don't put my name on the dotted line."
Absolutely.
Well, and you've had so much experience. You've had 11 combat tours.
Yeah.
You know, and over 20 years experience being out in special forces.
Yeah.
So you've seen the fog of war. You've seen proxy wars. You've seen how everything you just explained kind of unfold. And so you have a very unique insight into the military industrial complex and what's happening. And it's so interesting how the script is really flipped, where you have people like Dick Cheney supporting Kamala Harris now, supporting the war machine and what's going on, and how, you know, conservatives.
I've heard that's one step above Lucifer.
Yeah, let's not insult Lucifer by comparing it to Dick Cheney.
That's right.
So we have, you know, this totally different outlook now on who Republicans are, because Republicans kind of were seen as the warmongers. We were seen as, you know, big business, and big pharma kind of was mixed into that. And we've seen such a change happen where the Democrat Party is the war machine.
They're the machine,
They're the ones that are supporting the military industrial complex. They're the ones that are the defense contractors.
Well, and the me of a couple of years ago that was more moderate was like, I appreciated the fact that it was actually the Democratic Party and the NAACP and whatnot that were saying, no, these guys get to say what they want to say, even if it's offensive. They were the ones that were holding big business accountable for poor actions. Now they're just in line with all of this.
Yeah.
And you're seeing the likes of RFK that is behind Trump and is really exposing how the Democrat Party has left you. You know, all you Democrat voters understand, like, this is not the party of my uncle and my dad. And the media is trying to keep that quiet. They're not really promoting a lot of.
Well, he's seen behind the veil
and Tulsi Gabbard.
He's saying this scares me way more than what conservatives are supporting.
And what makes me nervous about Marie isn't that she is this like complete sinister person with like this evil grand scheme. She is a pawn. That will just fall in line with whatever they tell her to do. And it's been obvious in your debates when you guys talk, which we should probably get to in a minute. You can see she doesn't know what she's talking about. She has very little defense of her voting record. She tries to word salad it like her mentor Kamala Harris. And really doesn't have any excuse for what she's done. And she just is told, even in the debates and the town halls and things that she's had, she's very limited on what she'll share. She won't take questions from the audience. Everything's canned.
You have to write them down first.
And so, if you don't mind, do we want to jump into that real quick?
Yeah, so I've got producer Brian already has set up for us. We're at, I think, 11:55 in this first clip, Brian. And we're going to go over, bring it back home to the 3rd Congressional District here, and a recent debate that you guys had. And this is Joe Kent and Maria Gluesenkamp-Perez on the issue of Israel and Ukraine.
Military. That's what.
Okay, let me move on to foreign policy. Marie, you've supported the U.S. supplying weapons to Israel. The progressives in your party are not happy with your support for Israel, and now the U.S. is sending Israel its THAAD missile defense system to protect Israel from further attacks from Iran, and that includes 100 U.S. troops, putting American service members closer to a widening war in the Middle East. Do you support this latest move?
You know, I think one thing that we need to be clear here, we just passed the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th attack. That was the deadliest day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. The fastest way for this war to end is for Hamas to release the hostages. That's what my neighbors believe, that's what I believe, and that's why I voted. Every vote I take is centered on our national interests, our community's interests.
Do you support this latest move to supply the THAAD missile defense system?
Look at the confusion and the fear in her face.
I think that it's critical that we support the only liberal democracy in the Middle East and ensure that our reputation is upheld as somebody who stands by their word, stands by our allies. That is our national interest.
Would you support any limits to U.S. support for Israel?
I don't think we need. I think Israel needs the right to defend themselves, and I voted consistently on that. I support Israel's right to defend their borders.
Can you pause it for just a second? So something we've seen her say a lot of is that Israel has the right to defend themselves. The Ukraine has the right to defend themselves. How are they defending themselves when it is required for us to be involved in the way that we need to be involved in order for them to defend themselves?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I don't know what's going through your mind when she's saying that, but that seems to be just a canned answer she says, where that's an oversimplification of the situation that's going on. Anyway, I didn't know your thoughts on that, because that is her response every single time she's cornered on how ineffective and how much of a waste of money and lives the Ukraine war is. They have a right to defend themselves.
Right, but it puts a lot of onus on us to continue to fund that. And then she knows what the talking points are. So with Ukraine, she'll do this very simplistic, almost like Marvel comic books thing of like, well, they've been invaded and they're fighting for their freedom and we need to defend them. It's the exact same
Ukraine
rhetoric.
Small, Russia big.
Yeah, it's the same rhetoric that we used like for the justification for the Iraq war. Like, well, you want the terrorists to win? It's like there's no actual thought there, but it puts so much onus on us. And there was really good questions, I think, asked there. I mean, obviously, for the first time she was actually asked about putting boots on the ground with the THAAD missile system, which as a member of Congress she should say, hey, regardless of how I feel about that issue, that needs to go through Congress. That should have been any constitutionally minded member of Congress. They should have been like, well, we didn't discuss that with the executive branch. Like, that is not their role. That's our role. I mean, the president has some limited authority to deploy troops as needed, but like there's no actual like AUMF. There's no like, none of that's happened. So that's not even where her head went. Her thoughts about Israel, I think, are very interesting, because the Democrats right now are trying to pretend they're trying to have their cake and eat it too.
Absolutely,
they're trying to pretend that, like, number one, they care about Israel if they're in a district like Marie that leans a little bit more to the right. So she's trying to say, no, I support Israel. However, like, just the facts don't lie. If you look back, October 7th, 2023, within a week, Speaker Johnson had emergency aid that was earmarked to go to Israel. He had that bill on the floor, and it wouldn't have actually put any more inflationary spending on the backs of the American people. It was $14 billion that had already been allocated for Biden's weaponized IRS.
Oh yeah,
money's fungible.
87,000 agents.
The money is fungible, so Johnson pulled that cash and said automatically, we're going to. Israel just lost, I think, close to 1,500 of their civilians. They're holding hostages. They have American hostages. Let's give Israel some emergency aid, which made sense. Most people agreed with that. But let's not put more inflationary spending on the backs of the American people. Every Republican voted for that. Every Democrat voted against it, because the Democrats realized they had an opportunity. The Democrats wanted to send more money to Ukraine. Prior to October 7th, the Republicans, even Republicans who initially were for the Ukraine war, the majority of the majority were like, hey, we can't keep funding this, because of the same questions we just talked about. They were like, what's the plan? Even Republicans who supported the first and a couple initial aid packages were like, guys, this is a money pit. Like, what is the plan here? So Democrats, they saw that, hey, look, a lot of Republicans want to support Israel right now. Let's use this as a bargaining chip. Yeah. Well, so they shot it down, and they said, we won't even touch Israel aid unless Ukraine aid is there too. And this went back and forth for like 4 months, and that's why eventually you saw a $86 billion all new inflationary spending aid package get passed. The majority of it, over $60 billion, was for Ukraine. I don't fault the Republicans that voted for it. I wouldn't have. The Republicans that ended up voting for it, they wanted to support Israel. And I don't blame them. October 7th was horrible. But the Democrats ended up winning that. And then the Biden administration took the $14 billion that was supposed to go to Israel. He cut it in half. He froze the Israel money. And then he said that the $7 billion needs to go to Gaza, a.k.a. to Hamas. And so we continue. I mean, like October 7th, remember what happened if Biden wouldn't have unfroze the money to Iran. So, like, our plan right now is to continue to fund both sides of this. Perez won't address any of that. She just knows, in order to keep some of her donors happy, she says, well, I support Israel. I support Israel.
Well, and she's threading the needle here, because the people in CD3, we support Israel. But if you look at her answers, and I'm just looking at the look on her face, her nonverbals, she's in a panic through this whole thing. Yeah. She's like, what is the answer that I need to give to have moderates support
she's got a face real quick. Once you put the still shot of her right there, I mean, that says it all right. That's the panic face we're talking about.
Look, I don't expect her to be a missile expert and know what a THAAD missile is. That's fine. You don't need to know that. But when it comes to, like, are we going to put 100 U.S. soldiers in the middle of, like, getting in between Israel and Palestine, getting between Israel and Hamas, Hezbollah, with the Iranians raining down ballistic missiles, like, that is where a member of Congress should be like, I'm going to need some more information.
And you're going to need more than to say, I support Israel. Israel
They have
needs
a right to
defend
defend
themselves.
Yeah, and this is the problem. And people will ask me frequently, like, hey, are you just talking a lot about the military-industrial complex and foreign policy because, like, it's your wheelhouse and it's your background? And I'm sure I defer to that because that is my background.
Sure.
However, what I think a lot of Americans don't understand is how much money we spend on not just our military, but especially on foreign aid and how we get sucked into these different things. I mean, we're going to talk about the bridge and a bunch of local issues later on, but we'll have people like Perez will say, no, we can't build a third bridge. That's too expensive. What are you, crazy? But then you'll hear from them like Israel, unlimited aid.
Yeah, blank check.
You know, Ukraine, unlimited aid.
Right.
We'll just let the SecDef and the president deploy troops randomly. That is billions and billions of dollars that we don't have here. Well, we can't even secure our own border.
Florida, $750.
Right,
Ukraine,
exactly.
unlimited.
Well, I would say
it's a huge issue.
I would say too with the Ukraine. I mean, this is someone I'm just going to speak as someone who's not been involved. I've never served in the military or anything, but we have a very large Slavic population here in our area, many of which are from the Ukraine.
Yeah.
And, I asked some friends of mine because they were asking, and they knew my involvement in the party, and they said, well, where are you? Are you in support of Ukraine? And I said, oh, in what way?
Yeah.
What do you mean in support? Am I in support of the people who are living under a tyrannical government like you guys? I mean, why did you move here?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, things are really bad there. It's very corrupt. I mean, Ukraine has been for decades one of the most corrupt countries in existence. And so people have moved not because Ukraine's so great and they feel bad that they have to live there, so they want to go somewhere worse. They came to the United States for a better opportunity. So that place has always been, it has been for a very long time, very corrupt. And, tinfoil hat moment, you got the big guy, involved in the Ukraine, and you see what's happening with all of this. I mean, there's just so many moving parts. What we do know, though, for sure, is that we are pouring a lot of money in. Lots of young men are dying, a whole generation, and there's no resolution in sight with the current plan that we're on.
Yeah.
And the cognitive dissidence to be able, we support this, but to have all those people dying and not talking about that piece, I just can't process that.
Yeah, I understand. I've talked to a lot of folks in our Ukrainian community, and I'd love to talk to more if they're listening here. I'd love to have a conversation with them before the election. I understand in 2022, a lot of them were just like, we need to support, we need to support.
Right.
But a lot of them that I've been talking to in 2023 and now in 2024, they do realize that like this is a never-ending meat grinder for their people. Yeah. And look, if you listen to a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who say the quiet part out loud, like Lindsey Graham, when they say, oh, well, the Russians are dying and we don't care, it doesn't cost us anything. It just costs us, some money here and there. And it's like, well, number one, inflation, taking care of our own people. But do you listen to what you're saying?
Yeah.
Like, you're not actually supporting Ukraine.
No.
You're sending Ukrainian young men off into the meat grinder, and you think that's okay because every now and again they're killing some Russians? Like, that's insane. And it's also really short-sighted, too.
Absolutely.
It's like, at what point does Russia hit back in a way that puts us into World War III? So there's the escalation, but also just morally. And I've talked to a lot of our Ukrainian community here, and they've all lost a lot of loved ones in this conflict. And
it's
so it's
horrible.
like, wouldn't it be better if we got the killing to stop?
Killing.
And they've hammered Trump for that answer. And in this debate, she asked me the same thing, too. She was like, who do you want to win? Like, we're betting on a sports game. And the most moral answer is, like, we want the killing to stop.
We want the killing to stop. Hey, Producer Brian, let's go ahead and let's keep playing this video a little bit longer because we're going to get into Joe's response here pretty shortly, if you can bring that up.
Against terrorists.
Let me ask you, Joe, during a town hall meeting, you said that we're on the cusp of World War III, but the only war you think the U.S. should be fighting is at the U.S. southern border. So with that in mind, what do you think about Israel and the question of Israel? Do you support the U.S. providing any weapons, military support to Israel?
Certainly, yeah. Israel has a right to defend itself, and it's, I think, our responsibility to ensure they have the resources that they need. Right after the October 7th attacks, House Republicans put forward a bill that would have given Israel immediate support, except for Marie and the rest of her Democrat colleagues voted against supporting Israel right after October 7th when Hamas was still holding American citizens hostage because they wanted to use the crisis in Israel as a bargaining chip to negotiate a greater foreign aid package of all new inflationary spending to get $60 billion printed to go to Ukraine.
What about the THAAD missile defense system?
That is a terrible idea. U.S. boots should not be on the ground inside Israel. The THAAD missile system can be operated from Jordan, where our troops aren't under direct attack, or it can be operated offshore in the Mediterranean. Putting boots on the ground, that is essentially an act of war, because what happens when a Iranian ballistic missile hits them or one of the proxy groups hits them? Then next thing you know, we're at war that no one voted for. It's Congress's job to ensure that there's a check on the executive branch, regardless of who's in power, to ensure that our troops aren't blindly led off to war, as we had for the previous 20 years.
Well, let me ask you about Ukraine, because you've said you don't favor the U.S. support in Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion. Do you want Ukraine to win that war?
I want the killing to stop. Right now, we are on the cusp of World War III on multiple fronts. We have already crossed Joe Biden's stated red line. At the beginning of the conflict, President Biden himself stated, if we provided the Ukrainians with long-range U.S. missiles that would be shot into Russia, that would be World War III. Well, because Congress hasn't put any guardrails and actually done their job on this march to war, now we have U.S. missiles that are being shot into Russia. We have joint Russian and Chinese patrols that are taking place off the coast of Alaska. This is as close as we've been to nuclear war, really, since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And really, the stated...
Well, how does the fighting end? You said you want the killing to end. How does that happen?
We get both sides to the negotiating table.
And will that include...
2 years ago, when we first started talking about this, I said, hey, we shouldn't be involved in this fight. And I was called everything from a Putin supporter, to being anti-American. But for the last 2 years, we have pursued this strategy that says we'll give the Ukrainians unlimited weapons. And look where we are. We've had a generation of Ukrainians that have been killed, and Russia now controls more ground inside of Ukraine than did at the beginning of the war. By any measurement, the current strategy...
Let me let Marie jump in here.
We're not the ones calling you a Putin supporter. You're the one calling Putin a reasonable guy. You called Zelensky a thug.
What's the strategy then? We've done your strategy now for 2 years.
The strategy is to not hand the keys to continental Europe to Putin. Ukraine has the right to defend themselves.
You're going to keep listening to the same defense contractors, and you're going to keep listening
I'm listening to my community.
Our Ukrainian brass that weapons of mass destruction.
Our Ukrainian community here in Southwest Washington is personally hurt by this. First, Joe quoted Russian state media. Now they're quoting him. He is making the exact same arguments that our adversaries are. That's the reality.
So, Marie, just real quick before we go to break, how do you
let's pause for a second, Brian.
I think something we were talking about before we were recording is someone like her who has no experience in this whatsoever and is correcting you on how this works with simple things like they have a right to defend themselves. Mm-hmm. Well, how many Ukrainian men have died?
Yeah,
talking about this.
Yeah.
I mean, how many?
Minimum 400,000.
Somewhere around almost 500,000 people that are dead. They don't get to have this debate.
That's right.
They don't get to be there and talk about the situation while she's talking about. I've talked with Ukrainians in Southwest Washington who are hurting. No one's hurting more than those that are the family members of those that are being killed.
And just a lack of strategy too. I mean, look, if you passionately believe that we should stay the course, then there should be an actual vote on that, not just a vote for more money. If you have a strategy, and that's why I asked her, so then what is the strategy? Mm-hmm. This isn't abstract anymore. This isn't the beginning of the war. You're not putting forth your idea. I'm putting forth my idea. We're arguing on what might happen. We've already had 2 years of data, almost 3 years of data. So it's like, what is the strategy? And they can never tell you what the strategy is. Right. The strategy from D.C. with these wars is always to double down on failure. It's essentially the gambler's fallacy. It's always like, well, we've already invested so much, let's keep investing more. Because look, at the end of the day, these people, a military-industrial complex, the defense contractors who are funding her reelection campaign, they benefit regardless of whatever happens. They don't care. And so that's the problem. And I do think that's why you need people that at least understand that you're probably going to get a bunch of spin and lies from the military-industrial complex, and you need to be able to at least fact-check them and ask them intelligent questions. You can't just blindly cooperate with them. But you get people like Marie they have no background in national security. They get told, hey, you're being told classified information, for the first time, and we trust you with this because you're so worldly and you're so smart, and we're going to tell you the strategy, and your support is absolutely key. I mean, it's basically how you recruit people, and then they're like, oh, now I'm on the team. I know secret knowledge, and really the national security of the country relies on me now, and so it's just like they're really good at making these people feel important. I mean, the first time you get access to classified information, you feel very important, but that's exactly how they're playing these guys.
Well, I would hope that moderates and CD3 who've lasted this long in the podcast would take a look at this and say, hey, these are questions anybody that's running for Congress should be able to answer, right, wrong, or indifferent, or popular or not. Like, these are line in the sand issues. And what I hear is one person just reiterating their party line. And I've got another person that's saying, no, this is wrong. Absolutely. THAAD missile systems, no. Boots on the ground, no. We need to do this other thing.
Yeah.
And so I hope if you're a moderate, if you're an independent, maybe you haven't voted conservative in the past, I really hope that what you're getting here and what this podcast has to offer is a nuanced look at this and says, hey, who is going to be able to solve some of these problems? Who really has a plan for it?
Right.
So,
well, and a lot of this bleeds into kind of another subject, which is inflation.
Yeah.
We're spending now nearly $200 billion with a B into the Ukraine and then all the other spending that we've been doing.
Yeah.
I mean, how do we fight inflation? What do we got to do to really address that? Because I feel like the Democrats, they get asked this, Kamala gets asked this, Marie gets asked this, and they tiptoe around the issue. It's like you're so out of touch that when people go to the grocery store and they go to pay for the most basic things, all of us, I mean, I go and I'm going, this is ridiculous how expensive everything's gotten. I mean, what do we do to tackle that?
The biggest driver of inflation right now, and Congress doesn't want you to know this, is the way that Congress is spending money. I mean, it's basic economics. When you print more money, you have more money, more dollars chasing fewer goods. That drives the cost of the goods up. Washington, D.C. takes around $5 trillion in federal tax revenue in. Right now, for the entirety of the Biden administration, the government is running off of a $7.5 trillion budget. So that's why there has been a dumpster fire of inflation. We're 37-ish trillion in debt right now, and we're adding $1 trillion every 100 days because D.C. refuses to do what every single family and every single business has to do, which is balance their books. You take in this much money, you got this many payments you got to pay, and the rest of the money is what you have to work with, period, end of story. D.C.'s not doing that. I mean, D.C. got pretty smart. Like, they know if they raise our taxes, we'll vote them out. So they simply just print money. And this is where the whole omnibus system comes from, continuing resolutions. We get into all that. But it's the money printing. There's also the domestic energy policy that Biden has gone to war with that's driven, that immediately drove up prices at the pump, grocery store, and all that. But really, it's D.C.'s out of control spending. And you're not going to hear that from very many members of Congress.
Well, and here's the other thing is a few years ago, I would have been like, hey, to change this, I vote for an R and not a D maybe this go around. But let's be honest, we've had a lot of Republicans that have been hook, line, and sinker with all this
100%.
money and spending and are a part of this problem with inflation as well. So if you go to Congress, like, what are you going to do for us to fight this inflation?
So the most important vote I think that any individual member of Congress takes, especially if they're in the majority, happens before Congress even really officially goes into session. And that's when you pick your speaker. But more important than the individual who the speaker is you negotiate the rules for that next House of Representatives. You remember back in January of 2023, it took like 20 votes to seat McCarthy. Right. And the media spun that as like, oh, some Republicans don't like McCarthy. What they were trying to do, and they eventually ended up doing successfully, was they negotiated a rules package that basically said, number one, we only do individual appropriations bills. We do 12 individual appropriations bills that funds the federal government. We don't do omnibuses that jams 5 or 6 bills together that nobody reads, that costs, $1.3 trillion. And it's the Pelosi model of you have to pass the bill to see what's in the bill. Probably the most honest thing that Nancy's ever said. So do individual appropriations bills, but then they also put a cap on spending. And they said the cap on spending has to be what we take in federal tax revenue. Whatever that number is, it's around $5 trillion right now, but Americans are making less money, so it's about to go down. Whatever that number is what we have to fund the government. And then basically the insurance policy for that was the motion to vacate. There's some other good policy points in there too that I agree with, such as individual members being able to put forward a bill. So if an individual member could get enough co-sponsors, he could put a bill forward. It couldn't be blocked by like leadership. That basically enabled every single member of Congress, which makes sense, right? Because every member of Congress actually represents the same amount of Americans.
Well, I think it'd be interesting to hear Marie's solution to inflation. And I think we have a video clip on that for her response to that. So producer Brian, when you're ready.
To keep us on time. So let's jump right in. People in your district, like Americans across the country, are concerned about the cost of living. And the Democratic administration is getting a lot of blame for inflation. It has come down quite a bit, but people are still struggling. What is the number one thing you think you can do in your district to improve the lives of people and help make things more affordable here at home? We'll start with Marie.
Yeah, I mean, people are putting their groceries on a credit card, and it kills me to see that. People are working 3 jobs and still not making rent. And, I really believe that we have got to make this economy work for working people again. I'm really proud of the work I've done to support the critical skills like shop class, where we learn how to own and
Hold on, pause that for a second. Pause. I remember when I remember freshman year when I was in shop class, and Mr. Baker, before he was teaching us how to use the saws and the table saw, he said, "Guys, just want you to know, like, what we're doing here is going to help with inflation someday."
So just so we know, the question: what's the number one thing
Shop
that
class.
you will do for Americans to counter inflation?
Yeah.
And as absurd as like shop class the answer is, the fact that it would be shop class directed by Washington, D.C. It's like,
Yeah, which would be like a DEI version. Okay, we're all gonna make.
there'd be like 15 agencies responsible for
That
it.
would be the worst shop class ever. Oh my gosh! So keep playing. Let's see what kind of gold we have here.
So many avenues
Panic
to
face.
build wealth in the middle class, and it feels like a lot of my colleagues
Crazy guys.
No, this is golden.
This is good. I mean, yeah.
don't
just keep
understand
going.
how urgent the situation is, and they don't exercise
crazy
all
face,
the
I love it.
tools that we have as a nation of people who make and build things. So leveling up the playing field for small businesses like mine, bringing down the cost of groceries, and supporting a level playing
Antifa.
field for small businesses.
And Joe, what would you do?
Okay,
Go ahead and
pause
pause that
there.
real
Pause
quick.
there.
I mean, their business, and I know you called them out on it, Joe, and it's been a couple years, and they try to distance themselves from it, but they were helping restore leaf blowers that they were using to spray gas back
At the cops,
at the
yeah.
cops and everything else for
Yeah.
their business that they have, and it's always aches me because I own my own business as well. When she tries to use that clout of like, I'm a small business owner, and you hear about the things that they've done as a small business. Like if you own a small business, you got street credit for some reason for a conversation like this.
Yeah.
But she's so out of touch. Like it breaks her heart that people
Yeah,
are
it
putting
breaks your heart.
groceries on a
Well, she
credit
said
card.
bring down the cost. Well, how do you bring down the cost?
Yeah.
It's
Well,
just
she
like,
don't, but she'll never tell you that.
She won't. Yeah.
So the question is, what are you going to do for Washington CD3 to bring down the cost and help with inflation? And her answer was shop class. She's going to bring down the cost of groceries, but she's not going to tell you how.
Right.
And then she wants to support a level playing field for small businesses like hers. So those are the three things she's going to do for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's go forward. Let's see what Joe says. How's Joe going to help us with inflation?
Home.
So look, the number one driver of this inflation is out of control spending in Washington, D.C. Now, unfortunately, my opponent has authorized $4 trillion in new spending. D.C. is addicted to printing money, and that's what people in their regular lives can't do. Families just simply can't print money. They actually have to live within a budget. So Washington, D.C. has to stop this money printing. We take in around $5 trillion in tax income. We can't spend $7.5 trillion, which is what this current administration wants to do. So we actually have to do individual appropriations bills, put a real cap on spending, get back to being energy independent. That's going to take down the price of the pump. That's going to take down the price of groceries and the things that people consume on a daily basis. And then we've got to grow the economy. We can't tax our way out of this, and we can't spend our way out of this. We have to support deregulation for small businesses, deregulation for the timber industry and the fishing industry. And unfortunately, Democrats have supported excessive government regulations and are continuing to do so. So balancing the budget, energy independence, and ensuring that we deregulate and make a business-friendly, worker and friendly environment.
The cost of living
I mean,
also.
go ahead and
Pause
stop
there.
it there. I think there's so many countries that are like, especially China, I'm sure, that are shaking their head at us and laughing that we are sitting on a gold mine of our own natural energy resources that we don't utilize because of pressure from environmental groups and the likes. And we have it right there at our fingertips. And that would revitalize our economy. It would help combat with inflation. It would immediately have an effect on everything, on logistics. I mean, the price of that's one of the biggest things. One of the biggest jobs that are out there is truck drivers. It's logistics. And so the price of fuel goes down, the price of oil goes down. It affects so much. I mean, almost everything in commerce. And she is all behind the Green New Deal, isn't she? No.
She is. She'll say that she's not, but again, on all the procedural votes, she voted for it.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, I mean, we can just go line by line. She says she wants to, level the playing field for her businesses, and she says she supports deregulation. She voted against all the deregulation the House Republicans put forward. She voted against the REINS Act. Now, when she says like bring down the price of the grocery store, she is supporting Kamala Harris's price fixing. And every time price fixing has been tried in communist countries, it has failed. failed. It's led to starvation. It's led to bread lines. It's led to hyperinflation. So she supports that.
But this time it'll work.
But this time it'll work. It wasn't tried hard enough. She actually put forward a bill. She called it shrinkflation to go after like companies that are misleading. But it actually, her bill, when you read the details of it, it allows the FTC to regulate prices, which again, that is like straight up communism. I mean, she can say we're being hyperbolic, but that's exactly what that is. And that combined with what Kamala Harris is proposing is basically the death of the economy. Her party claims to be like pro-worker. I mean, she gave Biden the waiver to offshore manufacturing that we could be doing here in the district over to China. She gave Biden the waiver that allows him to source the electric vehicle charging stations in China. Like those could literally be produced here in Washougal with Precision United. Like they have the ability to do that, but it's cheaper to go over to China. It undercuts and takes the American worker completely out of the picture. So all of their policies, man, whether it is like the inflation, the border, they're all intertwined, but they all put American citizens last. That's my biggest issue with all of it.
Well, that's the big thing. We have people coming over the border. They're talking about not enough workers. Well, when you are you drive prices down on the American worker so much to where the incentives outweigh your reasons to work, then of course. So just to go back on this question, so Marie's answer was shop class, bring down the cost of groceries, and supporting a level playing field for small businesses. Joe, your answer was the number one driver of inflation is out of control spending in Washington. We need to deregulate to help those small businesses. We need a balanced budget, and we need energy dependence. Yeah. So if you're a moderate, if you're an independent, weigh it out.
Yeah. You know, this is a hot button issue. And and producer Brian, we're probably going to skip through a couple videos here. But this has been the tool that they've been trying to scare voters. I feel like the Democrats aren't bringing any type of actual good ideas and solutions. They're only giving consequences if you don't vote for them. So, for example, you vote for Joe, who's a white supremacist, racist, xenophobic,
all away all women's health care.
He's going to take away all exactly.
You hate women,
which comes up to the biggest hot button. Which comes up to
that'll be clipped up.
Clip that in. We're going to sync them.
But the issue of abortion, it comes up every single time. And now that things have been changed from the Supreme Court, sending it back to the states, which is the actual constitutional way to do things. It's the way it should have always been. Right. And that's the way that they were able to give it back to the states. She's trying to hang you on this whole, Joe said that he would have a national abortion ban. And you've said over and over and over again, like, I am not going to support a national abortion ban. That has been given back to the states, and each respective state makes the decision on where they stand on abortion. My view is I feel like there are people that are one-issue voters on this, and they don't care what anything else is. Our country could burn to the ground. Crime could be rampant. We could lose our republic completely. Everything would be in ashes as long as they can preserve the right to have an abortion. Yeah. And and it comes up every single time, and it distracts from the real issues that are really going on in our country. So speak to that a little bit.
I think what you said there is spot on. It is a diversion right now because abortion is not on the ballot at the federal level, and especially here in Washington State. At the local level in Washington State, it's not on the ballot. But look, the Democrats, we just talked about how much they have failed catastrophically on very, very big issues like inflation, like securing the border, like having us on the cusp of World War III and pouring billions of dollars overseas. So, of course, they want to talk about something else. Right. And they want to say, hey, we know that like most Americans generally are pro-choice. Most Americans are. I'm pro-life, not a fan of abortion. Right. However, the Supreme Court actually took the ball completely out of the federal government's court, and they returned it back down to the states. So it's not an issue, and there's nobody putting abortion on the ballot in Washington State. Right. And I think anytime you take a really controversial issue and you push it away from Washington, D.C., and you put it back down closer to the people, even if I don't like that issue, I think it's a good thing to empower the people more. And again, the Supreme Court has spoken, since this is longer form, the way I like to explain it right now is that if you had the most pro-life Congress like ever right now, and they passed like no more abortions, period, end of story, and the president signed it, the Supreme Court could overturn it right away. They'd say, we already ruled on this. Like, this is not the law now. Same thing. Put the shoe on the other foot. You get a Democrat supermajority with a Democrat president, and they say, like, hey, we're going to do taxpayer-funded abortions on every block in America. Boom, passed, signed. Same thing. The Supreme Court's going to say, we already spoke on this. Now, Marie will say something like, well, there could be a constitutional amendment. Like, for a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 of the House, the Senate, and the President. Like, what issue, regardless of abortion? Like, I can't think of an issue right now that's going to happen with, right? So, look, it's not even on the federal plate. It's all back down at the states. But what is on the ballot is taking down the costs associated with raising a family. We're talking about families here. At the end of the day, like, I do think we need to make childbirth cheaper. I think we need to make adoption much easier. Congress can help out with those things. And Congress can also say, hey, we're going to expand the child tax deduction for working families. We're going to stop taxing working families so much. We're going to make items like baby formula and diapers and all that tax-free. But, I mean, again, it all goes back to they would much rather have this very emotional discussion about abortion than talk about the fact that people can't, afford to fill up the tank.
It's all a
gas or
distraction.
groceries.
Well, and in the 90s, I remember folks on the left would accuse people on the right of being single voter issue, single issue voters. I'll get it out there. But yeah, so they would hammer us with that.
Yeah.
And now it's like the shoe is so on the other foot.
It is.
Because we've got all these bigger issues we're trying to deal with. I think most Republicans, as you said, are at a place where, okay, it's back to the states. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're relying on low information voters, which is a large portion of voters. They come in the very 11th hour and go, who should I vote for? What's going on? And they're hoping that a narrative like that will sway them, and it's just fear. And so my hope is that anybody's listening to this is, pay attention to what they're telling you. Are they telling you just consequential things? If you vote for Joe Kent, these bad things are going to happen. You actually have a plan lined out of what needs to happen, what are our major issues in our country and how to solve them. And from what I've been hearing by your opponent, it's you're a white supremacist, you're a racist, you're, you have no plan. It's ridiculous.
Can we talk about the fact that you're a racist real quick? Here's what I want to, this is my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong. You had some photos, like you do town halls all over the place.
Hundreds.
You've taken pictures with thousands and thousands of people. You don't ask them their credentials or do a background check
people
first.
People are surprised to know I don't do a background check before someone says, can I take a picture with you?
Yeah.
And look, man, we're here on a podcast.
Absolutely.
I have been on big podcasts. I have been on small podcasts. I've had guys stop me.
One more big podcast.
This is a huge one.
Yeah.
I've had guys stop me in the parking lot outside of events and say, hey, I have a YouTube channel. Can I ask you some questions and record you?
Right.
And as long as they don't appear to be like some crazy person, I say, yeah, sure, why not? Because, I think actually how social media works nowadays, I think it's great that people can have a small YouTube channel that has like 16 followers, but it's their friends. And that's just another way to communicate with people who maybe couldn't come to one of my events. And maybe that's the only way they're going to see me. So again, I don't run those background checks. We had some jokers. I say jokers, but there were some bad people that came who had like said some racist things online before, who came to one of my events. I think a lot of these guys are known by the other side, and they're quite frequently either monitored or directly sent to some of our events. So you can immediately say, like this one guy who Marie keeps tweeting about to this day, really didn't have a lot of followers on social media, yet CNN knew to follow him. He came to one of my events, and then boom, it was like Joe Kent's palling around with this white nationalist. And then he automatically had the money to go fly to a Carrier Lake rally, to fly to a John Gibbs rally, to fly to a Trump rally. Matt Gaetz, he's getting pictures of all
everybody
these
a black
people,
eye.
and CNN knew to follow him and do a hit piece every single time. So it's like, I don't know, is the conspiracies an op? I don't know. However, at the end of the day, for me, it's like I am still not going to like start regulating access to me, because I feel like as a candidate, and I feel the same way once I'm in Congress, as a candidate, I am taking a job interview with everybody that lives in the district. You come to one of my events, you get to ask me a question.
No matter who they are.
And no matter who they are, you guys have been to my events, I'll stay, I'll talk afterwards with people. Sometimes we're on a schedule and I can't stay and have a super long conversation, but I'll give everybody enough time to ask me questions and have a chat. And it's like, look, again, my staff's not screening those questions. We're not doing background checks on the people. And look, most of the time, if someone says, will you come on my podcast or will you give some comments from my channel? I say, yeah, why not? I mean, now, we've had to be a little bit more careful going forward after this incident, like where we do screen some of the platforms.
Did you verify that we're not racist?
Yeah, I did. I looked into you guys. You guys are pretty legit. But wait, you are associated with Joe.
That's right.
This is the first and last podcast now. Canceled. I think it's, it actually bothers so many supporters of you when we hear Marie say those things, because I mean, it's baseless, and it also is such a cheap way to avoid a real, true discussion about the issues. Because if I can label this guy, and now he has the burden of proof to all of us to have to prove he's not.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the most ridiculous thing. And you always handle it well, and you kind of ignore it, so to speak. But I mean, I can only imagine, as someone who has fought beside every person from every background and race, that has been called your brother and your sister out there, that's got to be irritating to some level.
Yeah, I mean, it really pissed me off the first couple times it happened. And then you're in this place where you're like, no, I need now explain that I'm not racist.
Right.
And that puts you on the defense. And there's just no good way to handle it. The only thing we have working in our advantage is now that everyone for the last, I don't know, since Trump came down the escalator, has heard that if you're a Trump supporter, you're I feel like it has reached saturation.
Yeah.
But it is being called racist is a bad thing.
Right.
And so now we've got this like little boy who cried wolf thing where it's like now when a real racist pops up, it's like, do we even believe that person's a real racist, or are we just screaming racist at the people we disagree with, which is 100% what the Democrats are doing. And Maria is very good at this. Anytime she doesn't want to discuss an issue, she'll just be like, well, he's a white nationalist. You know?
He associates himself with white nationalists.
And then this is exactly how they've shut down any discussion about especially the Ukraine war. They've immediately said like, well, you're a Putin supporter.
Putin apologist.
Yes. You're a Putin apologist. And then Putin's a bad guy. Nobody wants to be associated with Putin. And then next thing you know, we're not having a discussion about any of these very important things. So I think
while 400,000 young men died.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's just really important to realize whenever someone starts screaming, he's a racist, he's a fascist, all that, it's like that the person that's yelling that is trying to hide something.
Well, and he's telling you to shut up.
And they're just telling you to shut up. Yeah, I'm done having a discussion with you.
Yeah,
It's
you're
like,
winning.
Yeah, exactly.
It's done. This is my eject button right here.
I do think. Well, I guess we'll see here in 14 days how potent it is.
Right.
But I think it's kind of reached its saturation.
Well, let's talk about that. So we've got about 14 days. I mean, we're close. Actually, 16 days, right? Until Election Day. Getting out the vote.
Yeah.
Engaging with voters. You're out there doorbelling another local party. We've got, like I said, 15,000 low propensity voters that lean our way that we are focusing in on.
Yeah.
How important is it knowing that you lost by less than 1% in a food fight between Republicans? It's not existing now. We're doing good. We're actually unified.
Yeah.
How important is it for us to get every vote out there?
It's incredibly important. It's important for us to discuss issues and bring people over to our side, but actually just as important, especially if you look at the math, if we turn out everybody who votes Republican every 4 years here, it's not even close. It's a blowout. So really it is a turnout game. It's a ground game. Immediately, Thurston County started voting probably about a week and a half ahead of everybody else. Okay. We had teams up there in Thurston County because we have that little sliver of very, very deep red, rural timber country, Tenino, Rainier, Yelm, Rochester. We had people out there getting ballots collected. We're doing the same thing right now. I'm out there on the doors. The cool thing is that everybody who's listening to this or is part of the Republican Party, you can be a force multiplier. You can go out and you can actually collect ballots from people. If there's people in your life that are, maybe they have issues of mobility, maybe they're just like really, really busy and they just forget and a job and they forget. I mean, how many ballots just go and they sit on the table? I mean, because we mail them out so early, it's easy for that thing to become a centerpiece on your counter. And then it gets moved further and further away. And next thing you know, like you've missed the election date. So you can get out there right now. Make sure you vote early, but then people can go out there and they can collect the ballots. So everything's really going to come down to turnout. And historically, Republicans, we've been very independent minded. We view voting as a very individual, sacred thing, which is great. And I still feel that way in my heart. However, the rules here in Washington is that everybody gets sent out a ballot and anyone can go collect them. And look, the Democrats are literally
They've been doing that for a while.
decades. The Democrats are 2 decades ahead of us on having a ground game. I'm really impressed, though, what we've done in the last 2 years as Republicans, because I see a lot more door knockers out there. The PCOs in Clark County, the PCOs in actually all of our counties really have been 10 times more engaged this go around. And there's just new people showing up, blowing up our phones saying like, hey, I live here. Let me go knock on some doors, give me some addresses. Or there's just people doing it organically.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Well, we've got 16 days left. There's people that are going to definitely be delaying, until the very last minute too. But but one thing that we did last time was wait until Election Day. Election Day. And now we kind of looked at that and realized how bottlenecked that was, and people were literally getting in their stuff, not just Election Day, but like an hour or two late.
Yeah.
And so there was votes that didn't go in. So what we're telling people now is vote as soon as you can.
Right when you get it.
Right when you get it. If you got to go drive over to the elections office, put it in one of the drop boxes. Or mail it back, get it done. We just got ours yesterday. We're going to the event. By the time this airs, the event will already have happened at Firmly Planted that Heidi St. John's putting on with a bunch of candidates that are going to be there. I'm going to bring my ballot to that and drop it off. Me and my wife are going to do that and get it in right away. So everybody that's hearing this, if you still have that sitting on your counter, you're thinking you're going to wait till Election Day, that is not the strategy.
And here's the other piece with this. When you send that in and it goes and gets tabulated, we can verify, the Kent campaign can verify, hey, they voted already. You know what that does? That allows your campaign not to send you more letters, not to email you, not to text you, and he can use those funds to send it out to other people who haven't voted yet. So we can hyper-focus where we need to.
And I think my hope is that these negative ads that are being thrown at you are going to backfire. We saw that on a local level where there was some extremely negative ads against some local candidates. And I think what happens is voters look at that, it turns them off and go, okay, what's really going on here? If all they're throwing out is all this ridiculous accusations, should I trust the source that's saying this? Maybe the person that they're accusing is actually the good guy. You know? And I think that you've put in the hard work. You've left it all out on the field. I know that we're doing the same for you. And just glad to have you in the trenches, fighting the good fight.
You guys are crushing it, man. I appreciate you guys supporting.
And just kind of a final thing, what can we do specifically to help you right now? How do people contact you? How can we support you?
Yeah, I mean, we always need cash, so I'm always going to ask for money. If you can donate anything at joekentforcongress.com. We got outspent 6-1 last time. We're still at about 4-1 right now.
Okay.
So money really helps because those the voters that make their decision in the last minute in tight races, unfortunately, they are swayed heavily by the amount of commercials that are on TV. So we do need funding for that. But I mean, more importantly, really, if you're out there and you're getting people to vote and you're bringing people to my events, if people go to my website, we're doing it. We are going to be doing events up until the end. So if somebody has a question, there's no reason why they can't come to an event and have a conversation with me. But really get out there and collect ballots, knock on doors, and have discussions with your friends and neighbors.
So, like, go to all your neighbors, go to everybody you know that's conservative, hound them, verify that they've voted, that they've turned it in. Be willing to go to all those people and grab those votes if you can help them and put them in the red boxes.
Well, huge. And I would say one last thing we didn't really talk about. But you wrote a great book about your late wife, Shannon, called Send Me.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and how people can get that.
Yeah, so it's actually not a political book, believe it or not. So I wrote this. It's basically the story of my late wife and her service to our country. So it covers her childhood, how she enlisted in the military. She joined right after 9/11. Her father and uncle were both Ground Zero first responders. So her and her younger brother both joined the military right away. By the time I met her, she had already done 4 combat deployments with Naval Special Warfare, technically before women were allowed to be on the front lines. She was in the front lines, had a knack for foreign languages, just had an absolutely stellar career. We met at a pretty unique and specialized unit. And then, had our family together. So I wrote the portions about our family, but there's a lot in there. There's something kind of for everybody. If you like kind of true stories about the war on terror, like a little bit inside and kind of behind the scenes of the intelligence community and how we hunt down bad guys. There's a lot of that in there as much as we could. The Pentagon took some of it out. But yeah, we kind of walk right up to that line and tell people kind of behind the scenes there. But then there's also, the very true story of how these wars really affected like our family and how we endured multiple combat deployments together. So it's a great book. I'm proud of the way it turned out. So people can get it wherever they buy books.
I got a signed copy from you.
You did?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Well, we're rooting for you, and we're not just throwing out a prayer and rooting. We're out there
Thank you. Yeah, you
hitting
guys
the
put in the
streets
work.
and doing everything we can to get the vote out and make sure people are engaged getting in their vote as well. Can't thank you enough to have such a great caliber of an interview with someone like you for our inaugural.
Honored to be here.
Yeah, the Boom Collective podcast. I hope that you'll be on again.
Definitely.
But thank you so much.
After we get you across the finish
That's
line.
right.
Here.
Yeah.
Let's get you across the finish line, and then you got to come back on. So that's the deal.
Love
so.
to.
Joe Kent, everybody, running for
Thanks,
Washington
fellas.
State Congressional District, American hero. Thanks for being on.
Thank you, guys.